The alien queen dreaded a human match. Then the human soldier changed her fate. The sound of a human heartbeat was considered a war drum on Velthari ships. Corporal Nathan Cole did not know that when he was pulled out of the wreckage of his drop pod, half-conscious and bleeding from a cut above his left eye. He did not know that the 6 Velthari soldiers surrounding him had already fired twice and missed, which had never happened before against a species like his. He did not know that somewhere above him, in the cold dark of space, the battle between Earth's Third Fleet and the Velthari Armada had shifted in ways no military analyst had expected. He only knew one thing right then: he was still breathing. The Velthari were tall, long-limbed creatures with gray-blue skin and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They wore black armor layered with a bioreactive material that could harden on contact. Their planet was 3 times the gravity of Earth, so their muscles were dense, their bones thick, and their movements precise like machines. They had conquered 14 species in 60 years. They had never lost a ground engagement. Not once. Nathan pressed his back against a collapsed wall of what used to be a cargo transfer station on the moon of Calith Prime. Smoke drifted across the broken floor. A beam of pale green light swept past his shoulder, close enough that he felt the heat on his skin. He exhaled slowly. His hands were steady. That was something they trained you for, not to stop being afraid, but to keep your hands steady while you were. He counted the shadows moving through the haze. 6, 1 on the high ground to his left, 3 advancing in a spread formation through the central corridor, 2 holding the exit at the far wall. His rifle had 11 rounds. His sidearm had 6. He had 1 frag charge clipped to his vest and a ceramic blade in his boot. 11 plus 6 plus 1 plus 1 knife, against 6 of the hardest soldiers in the known galaxy. He took a breath and did the math the way his sergeant had always taught him. Not odds, sequence, first things first. He moved. The first Velthari on the high ground did not see Nathan until he was already climbing. That was because humans moved differently than every species the Velthari had fought before. Most species either charged forward or retreated. They categorized threats in straight lines. Nathan moved sideways, low, using the debris and the smoke and the irregular terrain the way a man who grew up hunting in rural Montana naturally would. He had spent his childhood walking through thick forests and mountain passes where nothing moved in straight lines. He reached the elevated platform before the guard could raise his weapon. There was a brief struggle, short and quiet. Nathan came away with a second rifle. 2 rifles, 11 rounds each, 6 sidearm, 1 frag, 1 knife. The math was getting better. He dropped back into cover before the other 5 noticed anything was wrong. He had maybe 40 seconds before they swept the high ground with a sensor pulse. He used 30 of them. By the time the pulse swept through, Nathan was 3 positions west, dug behind a collapsed loading crane, weapons ready. The battle inside that station lasted 9 minutes. When it was over, Nathan sat against a wall with a piece of metal the size of his palm lodged in his left shoulder and blood soaking through his tactical jacket. He was alive. He should not have been. He did not know that a Velthari surveillance drone had recorded every second of that engagement. He did not know that the footage was already being transmitted, in real time, to the command ship overhead. He did not know that the queen of the Velthari fleet, a figure called Sovereign Ithara, who had personally led the assault on 4 star systems and never once watched a human soldier with anything other than boredom, had stood up from her command throne when the drone feed came through. She had watched it twice. Then she had said 3 words in her own language that none of her officers had ever heard her say about any enemy. The words translated roughly as, "Bring that one to me." Her officers had exchanged looks. A human prisoner was unusual. A prisoner requested by the sovereign herself was unheard of. They sent 12 soldiers to retrieve Corporal Nathan Cole. 6 came back. And that, as one of her senior commanders quietly noted in his personal log that evening, was when the sovereign stopped looking at the surveillance feed with curiosity and started looking at it with something much more complicated. She watched Nathan fight those 6 soldiers alone, injured with limited ammunition, on a moon he had never set foot on before today. She watched him win. And for the first time in her reign of 23 years, Ithara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt uncertain. Not of her fleet, not of her strategy, not of the war. Of him, of what exactly she was looking at when she looked at this one bleeding, stubborn human being who absolutely refused to stop moving. She gave the order again, double the team, surgical approach only. No weapons fire. She wanted him alive, and she wanted to know why. She did not yet know that asking why about a human soldier was the beginning of something she could not predict or control. Nobody ever did. Nathan woke up in a room that was too clean to be anything but a cell. The walls were a pale silver, smooth and seamless. The light came from strips near the ceiling, cool and even no shadows anywhere. The air tasted filtered and flat, the way recycled ship air always did, but there was a faint scent underneath that he could not name, something organic, almost like pine resin but not quite. He lay on a raised platform that was harder than a bed but softer than the floor he had been expecting. His left shoulder had been treated. He could feel the tight pressure of a medical seal over the wound. Whoever had fixed it knew what they were doing. He sat up slowly, his head was clear, his hands were still steady, good signs. The room was roughly 4 meters by 5, no visible door, one narrow observation window darkened. Somewhere behind it, he assumed, someone was watching. He stood, did a slow rotation to take in every corner, then sat back down on the platform and waited. Patience was something Nathan had learned not from the military but from his grandfather, who had been a farmer in central Wyoming. The old man used to say that the land will tell you everything you need to know if you stop talking long enough to hear it. Nathan had applied that logic to most things since. A room will tell you things too. A silence will tell you things. A person who watches you without speaking is telling you something important about what they want from you. They wanted to see how he handled stillness. He handled it fine. After 40 minutes, a section of the wall opened without warning, smooth and mechanical, no sound at all. 2 Velthari soldiers stepped in first. Full armor, weapons at ready position but pointed down. Then a third figure entered. Nathan had seen Velthari in field footage, and once at a distance during the initial landing on Calith Prime. He had never been in the same room with one who was not trying to kill him. The one who entered now was taller than the soldiers, more slender, and the armor she wore was different, layered differently, darker at the edges, with a pattern along the collar that Nathan did not recognize as rank insignia but somehow understood to be power. She moved like someone who had never had to rush. She stopped 3 meters from him and looked at him without speaking. He looked back. Her eyes were the same mirror-reflective silver as all Velthari, but her face held an expression he could read even across species lines. She was measuring him, carefully, the way someone measures a thing they did not expect to find interesting. A small device on the wall between them activated with a soft click. A translation unit, he guessed, because when she finally spoke, the words that came through the air were English, flat and mechanical but understandable. "You killed 9 of my soldiers," she said, "in under 12 minutes, wounded." "I counted 10, Nathan said, "but one of them might have made it. I was not exactly precise by the end." She was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she tilted her head. "Why did you not run?" she said. "Where would I have gone?" "Anywhere. You had windows of opportunity, at least 3 moments where retreat was viable." He looked at her steadily. "Running means they pick the next engagement. I stop running when I can pick my own ground." Another silence, longer this time. "Your species has been studied extensively," she said. "Physiologically, humans are among the least suited for combat in this sector. Lower gravity world, fragile bone structure relative to body mass. slower reaction thresholds than most species we have engaged, shorter lifespan, limited natural sensory range. She paused. Every model we ran said humans would fall within the first 3 engagements. That must have been frustrating, Nathan said. She looked at him with an expression that might have been the Velthari version of surprise. You are not afraid. I did not say that. You show no physiological markers of fear. I have been afraid since the moment I woke up in this room, Nathan told her. I am afraid right now. I am just not going to show you that, because showing you that does not help either of us. The silence that followed was the longest yet. She sat down then. Not on a chair, there was no chair. She simply lowered herself to the floor in a way that was fluid and deliberate, and looked up at him from that position. He was not sure if it was a gesture of formality or something else. I am Ithara, she said, sovereign of the Velthari 7th Command. Nathan Cole, Corporal, Earth 3rd Fleet. I know who you are, she said. I requested your capture specifically. She said it without apology or explanation, just fact. I know, he said. You sent 12 and got 6 back. Yes, a pause. That also was unexpected. I figured. She looked at him for a long moment. I want to understand something, she said. Not as an interrogation. I want to understand how a species that should not have survived first contact is still here, still fighting, and still winning engagements it has no business winning. Nathan leaned back slightly. That is a big question. I have time. He thought about it honestly for a moment. I cannot speak for the whole species, he said finally. I can only tell you what I know. Humans are not the strongest or the fastest or the toughest, but we adapt faster than anything I have ever heard of. You hit us with something new and within a week we have a counter. You change tactics, we change too. We do not fight the last war, we fight the one in front of us. That is a strategic observation, she said. Not an answer to what I am asking. What are you asking? She was quiet for a moment. Then, how does a creature that knows it is outmatched continue anyway? Nathan looked at her. He thought about his grandfather's farm, about his unit, about the drop pod spinning out of control and the ground rushing up, and the moment just before impact when everything went very white and very loud. Because stopping is the only thing that actually guarantees you lose, he said. Ithara did not speak for a long time after that. When she finally stood and moved toward the open wall, she stopped at the threshold and turned back. You will not be harmed further, she said. You have my word as sovereign. Nathan watched her go. He sat very still until the wall sealed shut again. Then he exhaled, and for the first time since waking up, his hands shook a little. He let them, nobody was watching now. But he was wrong about that. Ithara stood on the other side of the observation panel for 6 more minutes, watching a human soldier let himself be afraid in private, and she filed that away very carefully in the part of her mind she reserved for things that changed her thinking. His fear was real, but he had chosen exactly when to show it and exactly when to hide it. She had commanded armies for 23 years. She had never seen discipline like that in an opponent. She went back to her command throne and pulled up every piece of human military history in the Velthari database. She read until the ship's cycle shifted twice. She did not sleep. By the time morning came, or what passed for morning on a ship with no windows, she had revised her understanding of the war entirely. And she had started asking a different question, not how do we beat them, but what happens if we do not? Her senior advisor, a weathered officer named Soth, found her staring at a tactical map at the 4th hour and made the mistake of asking if the human prisoner had been useful. More than you know, she said. Soth waited. Pull the peace treaty frameworks we archived after the Relin campaign, she said quietly. The ones we never used. Soth stared at her for a long moment. Sovereign, we have never initiated a peace negotiation. I am aware of that, she said. Pull them anyway. He pulled them. The war, which had seemed so clear 24 hours ago, had become something else entirely. And it had started in a 4-meter by 5-meter cell, with a wounded corporal who refused to stop moving. Soth did not trust the human. That was the cleanest way to put it. He had served the sovereign for 11 years, had followed her through 4 campaigns and 2 internal political crises, and he understood her thinking well enough to know when she was doing something unusual. This was unusual. He stood outside the human cell and studied the feed from the observation panel for a long time. Nathan Cole was doing what he had been doing for the better part of 2 days, moving, not pacing nervously, methodically. He would do a circuit of the room, test each wall at a different point, check the ceiling, the floor seams, the light strips. Then he would sit. Then he would start again. He was mapping the cell clearly, looking for weaknesses. Soth respected the professionalism of it even while it irritated him. He brought the human food on the 3rd day, standard Velthari rations, which no human had ever consumed before, for the obvious reason that no human prisoner had been kept alive long enough to need feeding. He brought a secondary tray with what the Velthari food scientists had assembled from scans, something close to human digestible protein and a water-based liquid. Nathan looked at both trays and without hesitation took a small amount from the Velthari ration first. Soth watched him through the panel. "That is not for your biology," he said through the communicator. "I know," Nathan said. "I want to know what you eat." Soth had been a soldier longer than most people on this ship had been alive. He had a finely tuned sense for manipulation, for performance, for the calculated gesture. He watched Nathan taste the Velthari ration, register the flavors, and make a neutral face. "Mineral heavy," Nathan said. "Dense, not unpleasant." It was not manipulation. Soth could see that clearly enough. The human was genuinely curious. That was somehow more unsettling than manipulation would have been. He entered the cell for the first time on day 4. Ithara had instructed him to begin what she called a dialogue, not interrogation. She had been specific about that, which had been its own kind of strange order to receive. Soth brought 2 low seats and set them facing each other and sat down across from Nathan Cole and tried to decide where to begin. "The Sovereign has been reading your military history," he said. "All of it," Nathan said. "Considerable portions." Nathan smiled at something briefly. It was a private expression. Soth filed it away. What did she think? "She found it dense," he said finally. "Your species fights an enormous number of wars against itself." "We do," Nathan agreed. "That pattern does not appear in any other species we have catalogued," Soth said. "Most species reach a point where internal conflict becomes evolutionarily untenable, and they unify." "We never quite got there," Nathan said. "Or we keep getting there and then something breaks and we start over." "And yet here you are," Soth said, "expanding into space, militarily capable, structurally coherent enough to field a fleet." "We are good at coming back from things," Nathan said. "Not because we are particularly smart about it, more because we just keep trying long after we probably should have given up." Soth leaned forward slightly. "I want to ask you something directly." "Okay. Do you believe this war can end? Not in victory for either side, just end." Nathan was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone stalling. The quiet of someone actually thinking it through. "That depends," he said, "on whether both sides want the same thing or just think they do." "What do you mean?" "Most wars," Nathan said, "are not really about what they start over. They are about something underneath it, territory usually, or survival, or pride sometimes. The actual thing is not usually the reason." He looked at Soth steadily. "What did the Velthari want when they first made contact with humans?" Soth was quiet. "Resources," Nathan said. "Expansion, safety, buffer." "Expansion," Soth said, after a pause that told Nathan it was the honest answer. "And yes, safety. We have 14 worlds. They require supply lines." "Human-occupied space," sits across the most efficient trade corridor in this sector. Nathan nodded slowly. So you did not want to destroy us, you wanted the corridor. Initially, the conflict escalated beyond original projections. It always does, Nathan said. But if that is the original want, the corridor, there might be a conversation there. Soth stared at him. You are a corporal, he said. You do not have the authority to negotiate anything. I know, Nathan said. I am not negotiating. I am just saying there might be a conversation. That is different. Soth took that back to Ithara that evening. He laid it out precisely, without his own commentary, which was the professional courtesy he extended to all intelligence of potential value. He told her about the mineral ration tasting, the question about the corridor, the phrasing not negotiating, just saying there might be a conversation. Ithara sat with it for a while. He is right, she said. That is exactly the distinction that matters. Sovereign, Soth said carefully. Engaging with a prisoner in diplomatic terms, even informally, has significant implications. I know. If the Fleet Council learns we are exploring. The Fleet Council, Ithara said quietly, does not know what I know. They have not seen what I have seen. She looked at Soth. How many more engagements at current rates before we take critical losses? Soth had run those numbers already. He had been hoping she would not ask. 7 to 9 large-scale engagements. At current attrition rates, we lose command ship capability within 14 months. And humans. Their production rates are difficult to model. They appear to be increasing. Ithara nodded slowly. So we win every battle and still lose the war. That is one projection, yes. She stood and moved to the narrow viewport that looked out at the black. Bring him to me, not the cell, my planning chamber. I want him to see maps. Soth went very still. You want to show him tactical maps. Selected ones, yes. Sovereign, that is. A risk, she said. I know, bring him anyway. Soth went back to the cell and told Nathan Cole to come with him. Nathan stood up from the floor where he had been sitting and smoothed out his jacket, as well as a man could smooth out a badly damaged tactical jacket, and walked out of the cell for the first time without being restrained or guarded at weapon point. He walked beside Soth through corridors that smelled of metal, and that filtered organic scent Nathan still could not name, and he looked at everything quietly and carefully, and he did not try to run. Soth noted that. They reached the planning chamber. It was a large hexagonal room with a projection system at the center. The maps that Ithara had loaded were showing when they entered, a wide view of this sector, with human and Velthari space overlaid in contrasting colors. Ithara stood at the center, looking at the projection. Nathan walked to the edge of the map display and looked at it for a long time. Soth watched him read it the way a surveyor reads a landscape, taking in scale, distance, shape, the relationship between things. The corridor, Nathan said, pointing to a band of space between the two color zones. It runs through here. Yes, Ithara said. And this cluster, he pointed again, is the main point of conflict for the last 8 engagements. 7 of 8, correct. He stood back. You did not need to take that cluster. You needed the corridor clear. The cluster is just what was in the way. That is a simplified reading, Ithara said, but essentially accurate. Nathan looked at the map for another long moment, then he looked at her. The corridor goes through our space. You need our permission or our defeat to use it. Or a third option, she said. He was quiet. An arrangement, she said, not surrender, not treaty in the traditional sense. An arrangement where the corridor is available under terms both parties can live with. Nathan looked at her steadily. That would require you to stop the current offensive. Yes. And it would require my government to agree to terms they do not know are being offered. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the viewport, stars drifted past, indifferent and cold. Why me? He said. I am not a diplomat. I am not a commander. I am a corporal with 11 years of field service and a shoulder that still hurts." "Because you understand," Ithara said. "Most soldiers fight because they are told to. You fight because you have thought through why it matters. That is different. People who understand the reasons for a war are the only ones who can understand the reasons to stop one." Nathan looked at the map again. He thought about his unit, about the names he knew and the names he would know in future engagements, and the ones that would not come back. "If I help you draft an opening communication," he said slowly, "something informal, exploratory, it would need to go through proper military channels on our side. I have contacts, but I cannot promise anything." "I am not asking for promises," Ithara said. "I am asking for a beginning." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He was still afraid, he knew. He was afraid of getting this wrong in a way that cost people their lives on both sides. But stopping was the only thing that actually guaranteed a loss. "Okay," he said, "let us start at the beginning." Soth stood at the edge of the room and watched a Velthari sovereign and a human corporal sit down across from each other at a map table, and he thought, for perhaps the first time in his long military career, that the most surprising outcomes were not the ones that came from the most power, but from the most unexpected places. A cell with no door, a man who refused to run, a question asked in the dark. The beginning, it turned out, had already happened. They were only now catching up to it. The message Nathan composed was 3 paragraphs long. He wrote it 4 times before Ithara's communication officer was satisfied with the encryption layering, not because of the content, which was deliberately vague, but because transmitting anything to Earth Fleet Command from a Velthari ship without triggering an immediate counterstrike response required a kind of technical diplomacy that took almost as much care as the words themselves. Nathan had requested that the message go to one specific person, a fleet liaison officer named Colonel Diane Holt, who he knew from 3 separate deployments, and who had a reputation inside the military for being the person you went to when the official channels were the wrong channels. Diane was the kind of officer who read between lines for a living. She would understand what the message was actually saying. The message said he was alive and being treated without harm. It said the situation had strategic implications worth a quiet conversation. It said the phrase corridor arrangement deliberately, knowing she would pull the geographic context and understand immediately. It did not use the word negotiation. It did not use the word peace. It said, "Please advise and respond through this relay point. I believe there is a third option." Then they waited. Waiting on a Velthari command ship, while a human corporal's careful message traveled across a war zone and hopefully landed in the right hands, was not a comfortable experience. Nathan spent most of it in what Ithara had started calling the dialogue room, not his cell, which remained available to him but which he had effectively stopped using as anything other than a place to sleep. He ate with Soth more often than not, which had started as something professional and was slowly becoming something almost like a routine. Soth was, Nathan was coming to understand, the most honest person on the ship. He did not soften things. He did not play diplomatic games. When Nathan asked him something uncomfortable, Soth answered it directly or said he would not answer, and the distinction was always clear. Nathan respected that profoundly. "Were you in the first engagement against humans?" Nathan asked one evening. Over the mineral-dense rations Nathan had genuinely started to prefer to the assembled human food. "Second," Soth said, "I commanded a strike wing at the Kepler outpost action." Nathan nodded. He knew that action. His regiment had lost 6 soldiers there. He kept that to himself. "Were they what you expected?" he asked instead. Soth considered. "They fought harder than expected, but that is said about every new species initially. What was not expected was the way they communicated during combat." He paused. "Your species talks, constantly, during engagements, to each other. Short bursts of information, yes, but also other things. We intercepted comms, and the analysis team was confused. because the content was frequently not tactical. Nathan smiled. What were they saying? Encouragement, Soth said, and the word came out slightly uncertain, as if he was not sure it was the right translation. Acknowledgement. One of your pilots, when his wing was taking heavy fire, transmitted a joke to his partner. Nathan laughed, a short, genuine sound. Yeah, we do that. Why? Because it helps. Knowing someone else thinks it is absurd keeps you grounded. Soth was quiet. We do not do that. I know, Nathan said. I noticed. A pause. You noticed. Your soldiers are quiet in a way that reads as discipline but feels more like isolation, Nathan said carefully. Each person doing their job very well and separately. Like a very good machine. But machines break when something unexpected happens, because the parts do not know how to compensate for each other. Soth set down his utensil and looked at Nathan with an expression that was not quite discomfort, but was adjacent to it. That is an accurate observation, he said finally. I am not criticizing, I am just saying it is different. Our chaos is also a weakness sometimes, but at least we bend before we break. On the 6th day, the response came. It came coded at a frequency Nathan had specified in his original message. An informal flag officer channel that technically should not have been accessible from this deep in Velthari space, which meant Diane Holt had moved resources to make it work. That alone told Nathan she had read the message carefully and believed it. The response was brief. It said, confirmed alive and noted. Third option received and understood, awaiting formal parameters, maintain communications. No offensive action initiated from this end pending follow-up. No offensive action initiated from this end pending follow-up. Nathan read it 3 times. He took it to Ithara in the planning chamber. She read it once. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something in Velthari that the translator did not catch, and Soth, who had been standing near the door, made a sound that Nathan was fairly sure was the Velthari equivalent of a sharp exhale. She has the authority to hold offensive action, Ithara asked. As a flag liaison, she has the authority to recommend and, in limited circumstances, to authorize tactical holds, Nathan said. This is within that range. Barely. She is taking a risk. Why would she take that risk? Nathan thought about Diane Holt, who had spent 15 years navigating the gap between what wars were and what they could have been. Because she is very tired of the alternative, he said. Ithara looked at the message for a long moment. Then she turned to Soth. Pull back the eastern engagement line 40,000 kilometers, she said. Passive posture only. Log it as a sensor recalibration adjustment. Soth blinked. 40,000. Yes. That exposes the... I know what it exposes, she said quietly. Do it. Soth did it. Nathan watched the tactical display as the Velthari Eastern engagement line moved. It was subtle. Someone not watching closely would not even have noticed. But to anyone tracking the pattern of the war, it was a signal. A deliberate step back. He sent Diane another message. 2 words, message received. She responded in 4, moving in good faith. For the next 48 hours, something remarkable happened. Nothing. The guns on both sides stayed quiet. No probes, no position tests, no long-range engagement attempts. The silence of a war that had been running hot for 2 years was so total that Nathan found himself lying awake listening to it and not quite believing it was real. On the 3rd day of the quiet, Ithara came to the dialogue room and sat down across from Nathan and put a data pad on the table between them. On it was a preliminary framework document, 17 points, expressed in Velthari legal structure, covering corridor access, joint patrols, territorial acknowledgement, and a proposed communication channel structure. It was not a treaty. It was the bones of a treaty. The kind of thing that gets quietly passed to real diplomats when the groundwork has been done by people operating outside the official channels. Nathan read it slowly. His legal training was minimal. He had half a semester of military law from his early officer candidacy program, which he had dropped to go back to field service. But he understood structure. He understood what the document was trying to do, and what it was careful not to do. Point 9, he said, shared patrol of the corridor. Both sides would need to agree on crew composition. That is going to be a problem. I anticipated that, Ithara said. I left point 9 intentionally incomplete. It is a placeholder for a detail that has to come from your side. Smart, he said. Point 14, the communication channel. You have it as Velthari hosted. Our side will not agree to that. Has to be neutral. Where is neutral? She said. There are no neutral stations in this sector. Relin space, Nathan said. They have been quiet through this whole conflict. They are not allies of either side. There is a station at their outer boundary that both sides use for commercial transport. Ithara was quiet for a moment. You know the Relin station. I resupplied there once, he said. Civilian transfer, clean place. They do not take sides. She took the data pad back and marked point 14. Noted. They went through the document point by point, slowly. The way you build something carefully when the thing you are building is fragile and important, and you only have one chance to do it right. Nathan pushed back on 4 more points. Ithara accepted 2 of the pushbacks and explained clearly why the other 2 were structural to the Velthari position in a way that could not flex. Nathan accepted those explanations. They were honest. Outside, the stars kept drifting past the viewport. The war held its breath. By the end of that session, the framework was cleaner. Not finished. It would need real diplomats and political will and a lot of hard work on both sides to become anything real. But it was cleaner. It had the shape of something possible. Nathan sat back and looked at the document for a long moment. He thought about the drop pod, the wreckage, the 9 soldiers in that station on Calith Prime. He thought about Diane Holt burning political capital on a message from a corporal who was supposed to be dead. He thought about Ithara watching a surveillance feed twice. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes, she said. In the beginning, when you first saw the footage, what did you actually think? Not the strategic analysis. What did you think? Ithara was quiet for a long time, long enough that he thought she might not answer. I thought, she said finally, that I had been wrong about something I had been very certain of for a very long time. What were you certain of? That there was only one kind of strength, she said. The kind that breaks other things. I had never seen strength that endures, that bends and keeps going. Your species does not break the way we expected. You break and then you continue anyway, which is something different. Nathan looked at her. You thought that mattered. I thought that a species which has that quality, she said carefully, is one we cannot afford to fight forever. And perhaps one we cannot afford not to understand. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Outside, a small Velthari patrol ship drifted past the viewport, lights low, nothing threatening. For what it is worth, he said, I think the same about you. Ithara looked at him. You know very little about us. I know enough, he said. You could have let me die in that cell. You could have used me as leverage or propaganda. You did none of those things. You asked me a real question and then you listened to the real answer. She was quiet. Where I come from, Nathan said, that is rarer than most people admit. The framework document sat between them on the table. Not a piece, not yet, but a beginning that was real enough to hold. Nathan picked up a stylus from the table, a Velthari instrument longer than human versions, weighted differently, and signed the bottom of the document in English. His name, his rank, his service number. Ithara looked at the signature for a long moment. Then she picked up the stylus and added her own mark beneath it. Velthari script, angular and precise. 2 signatures on a document that had no official standing, and no legal weight, and no binding authority at all. But it existed, and sometimes that was the only thing that mattered. The diplomatic shuttle, was a small civilian transport that both sides had agreed upon through 4 additional relayed messages over the following 10 days. It was not a Velthari shuttle. It was not an Earth Fleet shuttle. It was a Rellan commercial vessel that had been contracted, very quietly, by people who were not supposed to be contracting things, to carry 2 figures from a Velthari command ship to the neutral station at the Rellan outer boundary. It had no weapons. It had no military markings. It looked from a distance exactly like every other commercial transport that moved through that sector on any given week. Nathan Cole stood at the docking port of the command ship and watched the shuttle maneuver into position. He had spent 13 days on this ship. He was wearing the same damaged tactical jacket he had arrived in, because there was nothing else available in his size, though someone had carefully cleaned it and sealed the tear at the left shoulder where the metal had gone through. Soth stood beside him. "The Sovereign believes the framework has a real chance," Soth said, which from Soth was the closest thing to optimism Nathan had ever heard from him. "What do you believe?" Nathan asked. Soth was quiet for a moment. "I believe," he said carefully, "that the most unexpected developments in military history have always come from the most unexpected places." Nathan looked at him. "That is almost philosophical." "Do not tell anyone," Soth said. "I have a reputation." Nathan smiled. He held out his hand. Soth looked at it. The human gesture of handshaking was clearly something he knew about intellectually but had not encountered in practice. He studied it for a moment and then took it, his long fingers wrapping around Nathan's hand with a grip that was careful rather than cautious. Respectful. "For what it is worth," Nathan said, "you are one of the most honest people I have ever met. That includes my own side." Soth released his hand. "Safe transit," he said, "and Corporal." "Yeah. Do not get killed on the way home. It would undermine the documentation." Nathan picked up the small case that contained copies of the framework document, one in Velthari format, one in English, both marked informal and non-binding and exploratory in 3 different ways on 3 different pages, and walked to the docking port. Ithara was already there. He had not expected her to be. He had assumed their last meeting in the planning chamber the night before would be the final one, a quiet ending over the last points of the document, a long silence, a kind of understanding that did not need words. She had stood at the viewport for a while and he had stood nearby, and they had both looked out at the same stars. But she was here now, standing at the port with her hands at her sides and her armor adjusted into something that was not quite formal and not quite casual, and she looked at him in the way she had been looking at him since the beginning, carefully, like she was still learning something. "I did not think you would be here," he said. "I wanted to see you leave safely," she said. "There is a difference between trusting the arrangement and trusting every person involved in it. Soldiers answer to their commanders. The shuttle pilot answers to his contract. I answer to no one on this ship, so I came." "Thank you," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "This will not be easy. Your government has diplomatic channels that do not move quickly. Mine has a council that will ask uncomfortable questions about why the Sovereign spent 13 days in conversation with a prisoner of no political rank." "Will that be a problem for you?" he asked. "Perhaps," she said. "I have handled difficult councils before." A pause. "The argument I will make is the one that is true. The war as it was running was going to cost more than any corridor is worth." "That is a practical argument. The council responds to practical arguments." "And if they ask about me specifically?" She looked at him steadily. "I will tell them that I found an accurate picture of what we were actually fighting, and it changed the analysis." Nathan nodded. "That is true." "Yes," she said, "I try to be accurate." He looked at her one more time. 13 days was not long enough to understand a species, or a person, or a war, but it was long enough to know whether someone was genuine. Ithara was genuine. He had understood that since the moment she sat down on the floor of his cell and asked him a real question. I will make sure Diane Holt knows what you put at risk to start this, he said. She will make sure the right people on our end understand the same thing. Ithara made a small gesture he had come to recognize, a tilt of the head that meant she was filing something away. Good, she said. Context matters. The docking port opened. Beyond it, the narrow corridor of the Relin shuttle was visible, small and clean and very ordinary looking. Nathan picked up his case. He turned toward the port. Nathan Cole, Ithara said. He turned back. She held something out to him. It was small, a flat disc, dark gray, about the size of a coin. He took it and looked at it. On one side was a geometric mark in Velthari script. That is a sovereign seal, she said. It does not have legal weight outside official contexts, but it has recognized weight. If you are ever in Velthari-adjacent space, and you need it to mean something, it will. He looked at the disc for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his damaged jacket and pulled out the only personal item he had on him, a small flat stone, gray-brown, about the same size as the disc. He had carried it for 11 years. His grandfather had given it to him the day he shipped out to basic training. He held it out. That is just a rock, he said. From Wyoming, it does not mean anything official, but I carried it for 11 years and it has been in every engagement I survived. He paused. I think that counts for something. Ithara took it. She held it in her long fingers and turned it over once, and the mirror silver of her eyes caught the light. It counts for something, she agreed. He went through the port. The shuttle was small and warm, and the Relin pilot was a short creature with 4 arms who asked no questions, and offered him a sealed container of something warm to drink, and then turned back to the navigation panel and did not speak again. Nathan sat in the passenger section and put the gray disc on the small table in front of him and looked at it. Outside, through the narrow viewport, the Velthari command ship grew smaller. He watched it until it was just a shape against the dark. Somewhere in that shape, a queen who had never doubted herself in 23 years was walking back to her command throne, carrying a small flat stone from a planet she had never visited, on the other side of a war that might be on its way to being something else. Nathan picked up the communication device the Relin shuttle had provided and keyed the relay frequency. He had one message to send before he reached the neutral station. It went to Diane Holt. It was brief. It said, document attached. Framework only, no binding commitments. Requires proper diplomatic follow-through. Both parties have demonstrated good faith in tangible actions. This has a real chance if the right people move quickly and quietly. Please advise on next steps. He attached the framework document. He sent it. Then he leaned back in the passenger seat and looked at the stars outside the viewport. They were the same stars he had always seen. They looked different now, not because they had changed, but because the space between them felt different. Slightly less like a battlefield, slightly more like something navigable. The shuttle hummed along its course. The Relin pilot hummed too, something low and rhythmic, indifferent to the importance of his cargo. Nathan thought about his grandfather's farm, about the way the land looked in early October when the light went golden and the air carried the first edge of cold. About the way his grandfather would sit on the porch steps and say almost nothing for long stretches of time, and somehow communicate everything important in the quality of his quiet. Some things do not need to be said, the old man used to tell him. They just need to be true. This was true. An arrangement that had started with a corporal refusing to stop moving, and a sovereign willing to ask a real question. A 9-minute engagement that should have ended in one outcome, and instead opened a door nobody had thought to look for. A framework document with 2 signatures that meant nothing officially and everything practically, sitting in a sealed case on a small civilian shuttle crossing a war zone that had just, very quietly, exhaled. Nathan held the Velthari disc between his fingers. He thought about Ithara watching the surveillance feed twice. He thought about Soth tasting the word encouragement like it was something he had never tried before. He thought about the moment she had said, "I thought I had been wrong about something I had been very certain of for a very long time." That sentence, he thought, was the entire story. People who believed they were certain of something and then found out they were wrong, those were the only people capable of building something new. Certainty was comfortable. It was also a closed door. The moment you were wrong, truly wrong, in a way you could not argue with, that was when the door opened. Ithara had watched a wounded corporal survive the unsurvivable, and she had asked why instead of dismissing it. Nathan had woken up in a too-clean cell on a ship full of people who had been trying to kill him, and he had looked at the first honest question he was asked and answered it honestly. That was all it had taken. Not armies, not superior weapons or political will or formal diplomatic infrastructure. Two people choosing to ask real questions and hear real answers. The rest had followed from there the way water follows from a small opening in a wall slowly, then all at once. The neutral station appeared ahead, a cluster of lights against the dark. The Relin pilot announced arrival in 10 minutes in his own language, and then repeated it in a version of English that was heavily accented and completely clear. Nathan gathered the case with the documents. He tucked the gray disk into his jacket pocket. He straightened up as well as a man in a damaged tactical jacket could straighten up. Diane Holt would be at the station. She had confirmed it in her last message. She had moved fast, which meant she understood what she was holding. There would be people with her. Real diplomats, probably. People who knew how to take a framework document and build something official out of it. That would take time, and it would be hard, and there would be points where it looked like it was falling apart. But it would not fall apart. Nathan was not certain of many things. He was a corporal, not a prophet. He could not predict the future of two civilizations. But he knew what genuine meant, and he knew what he had seen in 13 days on a ship full of people who had been his enemies and who had, one question at a time, become something harder to name and more important. He knew Ithara was genuine. He knew the war had cost both sides more than the corridor was ever worth. He knew that the most important moment in any conflict was not the loudest one. It was the quiet one, the moment someone sat down on the floor and asked a real question. That moment had already happened. The rest was just the world catching up to it. The shuttle docked with a soft shudder. The Relin pilot gave him a four-armed gesture that he interpreted as good luck and opened the port. Nathan Cole walked out into the neutral station with a damaged jacket and a sealed case, and a gray disc in his pocket that belonged to a queen who was, at that exact moment, holding a small stone from Wyoming and thinking about all the things she had been certain of, and all the things she was not certain of anymore. Neither of them could see each other. But in the way that really mattered, the way that does not require sight, they were still in the same room. And the door was open.